I'd like to call to order the ACSD April 26th board meeting. We'll start with introductions. I'll call our board members and staff's first name. And then if you could just introduce yourself. My name's Mary Cullinane, board member. Mary G. Mary, you're on mute. Still on mute.
You're still on mute.
There you go.
Mary Gill.
Great, thank you. Chip,
Chip Malcolm.
Barb,
I'm that fast to get on mute. Barb Wilson.
great. Suzanne,
Suzanne Buck.
Caitlin,
Caitlin Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Mary Heather,
Mary Heather Noble, board member.
Vicky,
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Lorraine,
Lorraine Morse, board member.
Amy,
Amy McGlashan.
Will,
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Victoria,
Victoria Jetty.
Betty,
Betty Kafumbe, board member.
Lindsay,
Lindsay Hescock, board member.
and Henry.
Henry Carpenter, student representative.
Great. I think that's everyone for right now. Peter C is going to.
Peter Burrows,
Oh, and Peter.
Superintendent.
Peter Conlon is going to be a few minutes late. Peter, oh, no, thought that was him. Peter, at this time, could you call off those folks who are attending?
Sure. Joy Dobson, Chris Kramer, Cindy Atkins, Courtney Cron, Denise Bertholf, Hugh McLaughlin, John Flowers, Mark Monaghan, Ruth Bernstein, and Tanya Scuteri.
Great, thank you very much. As always, we would like to start off the meeting with a opportunity for public comment. If you wish to make a public comment, please raise your Zoom hand. Peter Burrows will then bring you over into the panelist section. At the end of your comment, then Peter will return you back over to the attendee.
Okay, Chris Kramer is coming over.
Sorry, just unmuting. There we go. I just wrote a quick note here for public comments. Since I believe, based on the agenda, you'll be discussing the Ripton issue tonight. I just wanted to read a statement from State Board of Ed Chair John Carroll that he wrote in an email to me the other day. He said, as far as I'm able to ascertain, nothing in statute directs the state board to assign a withdrawing district to any particular supervisory union, neither toward nor away from its present affiliation. I understand there are good reasons to want a withdrawing town to be reassigned, since it absolutely is true that it would impact the governance structure. But putting the district's preferences aside, I'd appreciate it if someone would comment on whether they agree with the state board chair's statement, not as to what the district's preference might be, but whether it's fair to continue to characterize reassignment as a quote unquote likely consequence of withdrawal. I've asked this question twice in light of Chair Carroll's statement as to whether the district's position has changed on this, and have not gotten an answer either time. So I'd like to ask for an answer tonight on whether the district's position on this has changed. I'd also just like to say that after last month's discussion of transparency, I posed 3 very straightforward questions, and it took quite some effort to get a very brief answer to even one of them. Sidestepping questions may be an effective way of making me seem obsessed, but it's not a great way of allaying concerns about transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up.
And next up is Tanya Scuteri.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great.
So as always, I want to thank all of you for the time and energy that you put into serving on the board. I know it's really demanding and it's very challenging, and your work is appreciated. The following is a quote from A Matter of Public Record, A Guide to Vermont's Public Record Laws. It was put out by James Kondo, Secretary of State, and I quote, "Officers of government are trustees and servants of the people, and it is in the public interest to enable any person to review and criticize their decisions, even though such examination may cause inconvenience or embarrassment," end quote. And as someone who's attended most board meetings and a lot of the committee meetings, I appreciate all the efforts made, but I also have concerns about transparency. The two are not mutually exclusive. And I hope that calls for transparency are not interpreted as personal attacks or allegations of nefarious activity. At the board meeting where there was extensive discussion around the public records request, I still don't have clarity around who exactly determined the specific 4 school models that the consultant evaluated, the transportation consultant, or how that determination was made. So we know that the consultant was given the models, but if we're hiring an expert of transportation and they have access to databases and modeling software, it seems like that would be something that they would sort of determine or guide, as it would fall under their area of expertise and why they were hired in the first place. And going back to the public records request, the most concerning part for me was the evaluation done in September 2020 by Truex Collins on a new 2-section per grade elementary school. I was at an earlier meeting where the board unanimously agreed that models which included new construction would not be considered. And I haven't heard any discussion at any public meeting that that stance was being reconsidered. And the only reference to this point of a new 2-section per grade elementary school was in option 2A as presented by Truex Collins, that included Mary Hogan as a 4-section and a new 2-section per grade elementary school. And in that model, all 6 of our small elementary schools would be closed. And there might be a perfectly rational explanation for that evaluation, but it's fair to say that the process that led to that point is not transparent, since none of us were aware that it was happening. So it makes me wonder, is the ultimate goal to close all of our small schools, all 6 of them, and we are just in phase 1 of that plan? I certainly hope that's not the case, but without the context of any public discussion around this specific evaluation, it appears to be a distinct possibility. I think we all understand this is a super complicated process, lots of moving parts, and there are no easy answers. It's been said that the overwhelming passing of the budget is an indication of the trust that the community has in the board. So I think it's fair to say that the community spoke clearly with the passing of the budget, that they support our district and all of the schools encompassed within the district, including all 7 of our elementary schools. We know the research shows that consolidation tends to not save money. You spend more on transportation, less on education, and there generally aren't any savings for the taxpayer. And we know the research shows that students, especially those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, benefit from having a local school and from having smaller class sizes. And we know it might not be feasible to keep all 7 elementary schools open, but I would like to see the conversation be, how many can we keep open instead of how many can we close? Our schools are amazing. They're an amazing resource. They each have their strengths and challenges, but they are all an integral part of the ACSD community. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Is that it, Peter?
Yep, that's it.
Great. As always, thank you all very much. Next on the agenda is the minutes from April 12th. Could I get a motion on those minutes?
I'll make a, I'll
go ahead, Barb.
motion. Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Great. Could I get a second?
I second.
Chip, any discussion or comments on the minutes? Betty?
I just have a quick question. Is it our practice to include the student representatives as in the attendees? among the attendees, or do we not? Do we leave them out? Because I remember Henry was here, and I did not see his name listed.
I think, Suzanne, you've included the student. It's everybody who's here. You're on mute, just FYI.
If I hear their names and if I see them, I try to include them, but I don't always hear their names, so I apologize if I missed Henry.
Great. So we'll add Henry to that list. Any other comments on the minutes? Mary Heather?
This is just a very small detail. Under the part of the minutes where we're discussing the update to health and safety, Vermont Health and Safety Guidance, within that paragraph, there's a statement saying that older students, MUHS and mums, still need to maintain a 6-foot distance while eating, et cetera. This is just a very detailed point, but I do think the et cetera is in question, just because when Kelly was discussing those things, my notes say that the guidance has changed the distance for older students from 6 feet to 3 feet, with the only exception being during eating. So I think just the record should just indicate that the 6-foot guidance just applies to eating and not anything else. At least that's my understanding. I don't know if other people had other notes, but since it's a detail that folks who have uncertainty about returning to school might wonder about, at least my notes just indicated that eating was the only thing that still required a 6-foot distance.
Peter, is that correct?
That's accurate. That's
Okay,
accurate.
great. So
That's what I heard.
we could just make the adjustment to that comment then. Any other adjustments? Barb?
Yeah, in that same section, the sentence above it, and I'm not quite sure all the words are here. It says no longer a quarantine requirement for vaccinated individuals to come and go. And then in the next sentence, it says after being vaccinated and individuals have illness like symptoms, they need to stay home. I'm not quite sure what's that saying. After being vaccinated and individuals, it makes it sound like that individuals that have been vaccinated need to stay home. And I'm not thinking that was the intent.
People that are vaccinated, even if they come down with an illness, they have to stay home.
Okay, after being, okay, so it's really then just folks that are sick. After being vaccinated and individuals, right now it's an and statement, so it basically says after being vaccinated, individuals have to stay home. So if
So
they're
any
sick,
individual with symptoms has to stay home.
that's, yeah.
I think that's a typo, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be easier to, since it's part of, people may look at that and be confused. Thank you, sorry.
No worries. All right, so with those adjustments,
I did find another typo if you're interested, under B. There's just an extra S at the very last sentence. Teachers are hopeful and optimistic about their growth over the year, I think, instead of the years, because it was talking about what was happening for the current year. It's just a nit.
no worries. Great, so motion to approve with those changes as noted.
We made a motion. I think all we have to do is vote.
Yep. All those in favor? Any opposed? So moved. Next up is to approve the ACSD bills. Chip?
I read the bills on the 19th of April. Presume Victoria, you did too. Thank you. It was a total under the general account of $401,800. $78.48. All the bills were appropriate. And I make a motion that we approve the bills as read.
Second. Great. Any discussion? All those in favor? Hand up, aye. Any opposed? Betty, just for the votes, it's just so we could record your vote. Great. Favor? Perfect. Thank you. So moved. Next up, report of the superintendent.
Great. So first thing is a continuation of our presentation at our last board meeting, and that incredible video, which I think really helped to shed light on the depth of the work that we're doing with International Baccalaureate. I think we all hear a lot and we hear different things from different places, and having the ability to see that, and I hope everyone's had a chance to look at that again. It is on the website, and Caitlin can share where that is to help you get there, under the, I believe it's under the IB link. And so we because we got cut short with questions and conversation, we asked our IB coordinators to come back, and Caitlin is going to, I think, set this up briefly and then open it up for conversation to kind of share and kind of learn more together about the work that we are doing and the impact that it's having. So I'm going to right now bring over our coordinators to the panelist zone here.
Bring Mark too, Peter.
That was my plan. Okay. All right. So I'm going to hand it off to Caitlin to introduce our guests and to kick this off.
Thank you. So I prepared for 2 weeks ago, I prepared a little intro to the video with the video being the real show, and then just a little bit of closing. And so I'll just share those thoughts quickly. And really then open it up to conversation. I really appreciated that people wanted to talk more about IB, and I also appreciated Chip's comment that he'd like to see more than just the glossy part, right? And ask some real questions about how things are really going. So I think it's really especially helpful to have the teaching and learning team here to field some of those questions. So in brief introduction, you see Joy Dobson on the screen. She is our PYP coordinator. We have only one PYP coordinator this year. She has really been leading curriculum across all of our 7 elementary schools all year long. Courtney Cron is our MYP coordinator. She serves in a curriculum leadership role across both the middle school and the high school. Cindy Atkins is the diploma program coordinator. She is seeing our first cohort of IB-DP candidates through finishing up their senior year, which has been extra challenging in a pandemic, but really successful in a lot of ways. And then Mark Monahan is not officially an IB coordinator. He is our tech integration specialist, and it was just a gift to us that he arrived with deep IB background. And so when he does tech integration, he really brings it with that foundational knowledge about teaching and learning practices in the IB to that work, which is wonderful to see technology as a tool for learning as opposed to a thing in and of itself. And I want to thank this whole team for the work that they did on creating that video, and also especially Mark, who really put a lot of hours into capturing film and editing film and pushing it back out to this group for feedback, and then graciously accepting the feedback. He was really great. So you all know this, but you know, just as a refresher, it was 2015 when ACSD started its IB journey. And the premise was, under the strategic plan, we were looking for a common curriculum framework to help us provide a more equitable education for all of our students. And that kicked off the inquiry into IB. that predates my arrival at ACSD. My first task when I got here in 2016 was to synthesize the notes of all of these different inquiry groups into a feasibility study. And it was October of 2016 when the new unified ACSD board voted unanimously to bring IB to all of our 9 schools concurrently. And that started a long authorization process. So the authorization process, becoming IB schools, has had implications for teaching practices, for assessment and progress reporting, for course offerings and scheduling and professional learning. It's been really far-ranging school change across 9 schools in one district. So it's really been an overhaul in many ways. And the change has been broad at first, but it's becoming increasingly deep as we really understand our work as educators differently. And I think that you see some of those themes emerging in that video that we shared. So it was the summer of 2019 when our diploma program was authorized. It was about 6 months later in December of 2019 that our MYP was authorized across 2 schools. And it was April of 2020 when we were scheduled to have our verification visits for all 7 elementary schools. And we had put so much work into preparing for that. And then, like everything else in the spring of 2020, the ground fell out from under that. And our teachers and leaders rallied and pulled together virtual verification visits in June of last year, in that spring of so much uncertainty. And that was a lot of work when people were tired, and they did it anyway. And I'm so grateful that they did, because it would have been really hard to pick it up again this fall. It was September of 2020 when all 7 schools were recommended for authorization by the IB with no matters to be addressed. It's like acing the test. It was really, really exciting. And it was easy to miss that milestone, because we were so focused on just bringing kids safely back to school and managing hybrid instruction. But we are now an IB World District, one of like fewer than a dozen in the United States, offering the continuum of pre-K through grade 12 programs. And we've learned so much and grown so much, and we've got a really long way to go, but still that was an important milestone. So this fall, this little teaching and learning team got together, and at one point, one of them said, you know, if we just don't lose ground on IB this year, that will be a success. And we all sort of concurred, yes, if we just don't lose ground, if we just hold the line, it's gonna be okay. And it's interesting, some of the things that the pandemic has done for us has caused us not to lose ground. We've had to work together so much more closely in this context. Our administrators are so deeply collaborative, more so than ever before. Our teaching teams across schools have had some real growth in their collaborative practices. We never could see a way forward to virtual meetings before the spring of 2020, and we're kind of over that, which helps with cross-school collaboration. So I think there are, we would have had a different IB growth year if not for the pandemic, but we didn't lose ground. And this video was a really great opportunity for us to ask our colleagues how it's going and hear from them, and start to think about both where our successes have been, what we're proud of and pleased about, and where we see ourselves going next. So we know that we have set a vision of IB for all, this idea of this world-class education that's accessible and supports success for all students, and that we still have room to grow in that. And we've talked about it a handful of times in this context. So much of our work is really picking up that system of services design team work that Vicki has led for years, and weaving it closely into this curriculum work that we're doing to make sure that we have the systems and supports so that all kids can access IB and be successful there. It's really written into our COVID recovery plan, which we'll talk about a little bit later today, this idea of how do we support all students to success in this framework. And that aligns well with Act 173, which has at its foundation a strong tier 1 coordinated curriculum, and we've been building that together over the last several years. So I think we see a lot of work ahead of us, but we appreciated the opportunity to pause and share some of the positives. So that's my whole spiel, and we would just love to hear your questions and answer them to the best of our ability. Oh, and Peter mentioned the video is posted online. If you go to the ACSD webpage and click on the International Baccalaureate link at the top, it'll bring you right to the page where the video's displayed.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Caitlin, and all the coordinators who are joining us again. We appreciate you carving out another evening to spend with us. I'll kick off from a question perspective, just to provide folks with context. Could you talk a little bit, and if this is Caitlin or one of the coordinators, it doesn't matter, how should we think about the role of the coordinators? Are they spending most of their time with instructors, with teachers in buildings, with principals? Talk a little bit about that role so that we have context for their feedback. And then could you also talk a little bit about context for becoming accredited, and with those, without any concerns, did those folks spend a lot of time in classroom with teachers getting that level of feedback, or was that time spent with coordinators and you, just so folks get a level of like how this all works?
So I could answer all of those, but I'd rather you hear from the coordinators. And I think that they can tell different stories about how that verification visit worked, because some of them worked the way they're supposed to in non-pandemic times, and then the PYP was really very different. But let me ask, Courtney, Cindy, and Joy, maybe answer Mary's first question about what is your role? Who do you interface with, and what work do you do in and for our district?
I can go first. As a DP coordinator, first of all, as a coordinator for IB, the job description really varies depending on the level of the program you're coordinating. And as the diploma program coordinator, I'm involved with grades 11 and 12. And just like the high school experience, you're getting ready for graduation and the stakes all of a sudden become really huge. You're getting ready for that IB diploma. So I spend a lot of time with talking and communicating with IB directly. I have to register students. I have to upload all of their internal investigations along with teacher comments. I spend a lot of time uploading work and communicating with IB, but at the same time, I also support teachers. I host monthly DP teacher meetings because we often have specific topics just to DP work. As a school, and early in the fall, I work with the DP teachers to organize an internal assessment calendar because we need to spread out all of those internal assessments and all of the subjects throughout the year. So there's a lot of coordination that I work with the teachers on broad topics, but I also I would say almost to a degree, coach teachers as well if they're struggling. But all of the DP teachers have to go away to an IB workshop and be trained by IB. And for DP, the course, the subject is very much prescribed for what's being taught. And so again, I'm that bridge coordinating between teachers and IB if there are any issues that come up. And then I do work with the administration, and the school counselors. I definitely work with the school counselors very closely when students are struggling. So I'm there also. I host meetings. They were not monthly meetings this year because of the pandemic, but I did have some cohort meetings, and I'm there to support the students. I'm always there to support the students, but often that means also involving the school counselors. And then I coordinate also with the principal and assistant principal as far as larger structure issues and coordinating. So there's many different faces to who I'm working with.
I can go ahead. I'm the PYP coordinator, and I serve 7 different elementary schools. So my role this year is a little bit different in COVID than it would be in a regular year, meaning that this year I didn't have the availability to travel from school to school to school, and much of my work happened virtually with principals and with teachers. At the PYP level, we have IB teacher leaders. We have 10 IB teacher leaders that I leaned on incredibly deeply this year to help me in the work. So the IB teacher leaders work at the grade levels. And also we have an IB teacher leader that is a librarian, and then an art teacher and a Spanish teacher. So we have grade levels, and then we have the arts movement and librarian leaders. So I meet with them. We meet every 3 weeks for 2 hours, and we do both training, learning ahead, and also preparing for the collaborative team meetings. And our collaborative team meetings this year have been just about every 2 weeks, not consistently, but usually every 2 weeks. And in those collaborative team meetings is where we are going to prepare the next unit of study. We're going to also collaborate on assessments, writing assessments, and revising units as we move forward. One of the things that happened for us when we went through authorization, we were authorized on what was called the old PYP, and we've now moved to the enhanced PYP. And reflection is plays a huge role in the enhanced PYP. So that is the other piece that's entered our collaborative teams is going through a series of reflections, not only at the end of every unit, but embedded in the work. So with working with principals, one thing I'm really excited about is a closer relationship with the principals that lead arts movement, PE, and Spanish, those collaborative teams. So now we have bi-weekly meetings where we build those agendas together, trying to coordinate things that are happening at the grade levels, meetings, and then bringing those to art movements and Spanish and PE. And so that has been a big step this year, and I'm really excited about where that is going. For example, in Spanish this year, they have been able to write 3 units, which will be 3 standalone units for Spanish for 2nd grade through 5th grade starting next year, which is a huge step. And something that doesn't necessarily have to happen just yet. So they feel really encouraged that they're moving ahead. And then they will have these 3 units, and then they will also have a series of what we call annexes. And these annexes will they will connect to classroom units through the lines of inquiry and make connections of what's happening from the classroom into Spanish. And so that's another step that we're making.
So to Mary's point with the verification visits, when we did our virtual verification visits, we made videos, narrated slideshows of each school, giving our virtual visitors, authorizers, a tour, but that's not the same as experiencing students learning. So they got a much different experience, but maybe Courtney can tell us a little bit about what the MYP authorization process was like, because that was pre-COVID and much more how it is supposed to be.
It was pre-COVID, but we had a snow day, which was a little bit of a bummer. But well, one thing I really like about the authorization process is that it's very self-reflective. So we do have a set of standards and practices that we have to demonstrate when our visiting team comes, and our visiting team is made up of other teachers and coordinators and administrators from around the country. So there's a little bit of a fear of this, IB police who are going to come in and check us out. And really, they're just people going through the same constructivist process that we're going through and asking us to self-reflect on our goals. So a team came into our district, and we did have some matters to be addressed, and what that looked like is we got to reflect on where we were with those matters and make some corrections and then resubmit. So that's what it will look like every 5 years in the MYP is we'll have a team come and we'll work together to say what our goals are for the next 5 years. And we'll have a plan to carry out those goals. And then the team will come back and reflect with us where we are against those goals. So it sometimes does feel like a little bit of an external oversight. I don't necessarily feel that in a bad or ominous way. It's more of just, to me, it feels like holding ourselves accountable for what we say we want to do.
Thank you. Other questions for the team? Wow. I'll just start rolling through what I see. Mary G.
So I'm interested in the collaborative team meetings. Joy, you brought those up.
Yes.
Does that mean that teachers, all the grade level teachers are meeting with you for that and developing the curriculum? Is that what you said?
Right. So in this virtual year and being one coordinator for all of the grade levels, they're not meeting with me necessarily every single time, but they are meeting with an IB teacher leader, and then I'm often leading a meeting. But if we were going into next year and thinking it's a regular year, collaborative team meetings would happen, and in that time I would be meeting with grade level teams. We would be working together on our units, preparing, and a major focus going forward is really going to be on formative assessment and student agency. And what another piece which we call the approaches to learning, which are the skills that are embedded in our learning. And so those are some focuses moving forward. And in those collaborative sessions, we have the grade level teachers, and then scheduled within our interventionist, librarians, and special educators also collaborate at, into those meetings. And then art, movement, Spanish, and PE have collaborative team meetings also.
Wow, quite a, that's amazing. Are the teachers finding this an overwhelming process, or are they feeling like it's doable? I mean, I just wonder how much, because it sounds like it's a lot for them to.
Well, I'll have to say it kind of goes up and down where, like I look at May, and May is packed, right? There's a meeting schedule, like we've come off from spring break and we are rolling forward, and it seems like it's packed. And then I also have calls from teachers that are saying, is there any way that we could meet every week rather than every other week? Because it's really important work. And so I think, the calendar definitely impacts when these meetings seem stressful, and then and also the collaborative teams, the needs of the team also mean that it's very important that they come together and do this work, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
Barb, then Chip.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to pick your brains and ask questions. This is awesome. Thank you. A couple things. I've been thinking about questions since our last meeting, so I'll try to be brief here. So we've mentioned about, IB coordinators, and it might be good to kind of clarify for the public how many are really full-time positions versus it's really, I'm assuming when we talked about IB teachers, leaders, that it's really an added role that existing teacher has, but I'm just assuming that. So could we kind of just articulate, how many are really dedicated IB coordinators? The role of the teacher leader, is that in conjunction with also being a regular teacher? Just a little point of clarification there would be awesome.
I can answer that, Barb. So yes, the IB teacher leaders get a stipend on top of their regular teaching duties. It's like at the At the secondary level, the equivalent is department coordinators, right? So there's a department coordinator for each of our content areas at the middle school and the high school. They're a teacher with additional duties who receive a stipend for the work they do beyond their contract. And at the elementary level, the point of leadership is predominantly at the grade level. So it's a person to coordinate the grade level curriculum across the schools. And then Joy mentioned, we've got one focusing on bringing together arts and movement teachers and one Spanish. So yes, it's a stipend on top of a regular teaching job. The coordinators, you can see all three of our current coordinators here. And next year we'll have 4, which is what we had pre-COVID as well, 2 PYP coordinators. So Joy is our pre-K 2 specialist, and next year she will once again have a specialist colleague who focuses on the upper elementary grades. They're interesting in terms, they are all IB coordinators and they also wear various hats. So they, at the high school, we had curriculum leaders pre-IB, and we repurposed those roles into these coordinator roles. We had a math leader at the district level that also became a PYP coordinator. So these are, the IB coordinators are comparable to what other districts have in terms of like a proficiency-based coordinator or a personalized learning coordinator or a literacy coordinator. It's a role that works at that intersection of administrative leaders and peer and teaching colleagues, and does a lot of work in terms of supporting, in this case, teaching and learning across a wide range of contexts. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And so it sounds like there's not necessarily additional staff beyond what it was in the past, but things have been redefined. These other coordinators, leaders now are just called, they have a different role. They're called something else. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that's true. And also, it hasn't been quite that linear, right? So we had these 2 part-time coordinators at the high school. Cindy has been a part-time coordinator through her for a very long time, and then she still teaches chemistry, right? And then got the title of DP coordinator. It was like another duty that she picked up. Her partner took a job outside of the district, and we actually, we had one coordinator, non-IB coordinator leave, and that's when we hired Courtney. And and they also are partially grant funded. So it's really hard to describe in an incredibly linear way how all of these things have evolved over time, but loosely speaking, it was a repurposing of positions rather than a creation of new ones. I think that we did bring on more PYP leadership when it became clear that one person leading 7 schools was unsustainable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chip? You're on mute, Chip.
I have a question regarding from the student perspective, and I guess I would address it to Cindy primarily on the DP program. I had some sort of feedback last year indirectly relative to the fact that, or last fall, I guess, that the DP program is obviously deep. It's demanding, it's time consuming. It requires a great deal of learning from the point of view of just managing your time. And that for a lot of people, there was a real concern that this would eliminate one way or another students who were, let's say, active in athletics, interscholastic athletics, or active in something else which required sort of a lot of after school work, that would eliminate them from doing one or the other. And I guess that's a concern for me, because I think the model for students who were academically at the top of the spectrum and were also very active in other school activities, including athletics, I don't want to see it sort of dominate in a way that would eliminate certain parts of their total school experience. So, I guess you were a coach, so a coach athletically, and you obviously have the DP students there, but I think I'd want some comments on that. And how do you think it has gone this first attempt, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, so I can say for our first cohort, we have 28 students who are full DP candidates, and we have a large number of two-sport athletes in that group. It is a demanding program. It's not the right fit for everyone. I would say one of the areas, if a student has a strong interest in a certain academic area and they want to pursue that and maybe pursue it through using other venues for courses, alternative pathways, or something in the career center that they want to pursue, anything during the school day that's going to limit their ability to be in their 7 required subjects, that is the more difficult one to get around. For the athletes, I know they're busy, they're very busy students. The full DP candidates have to be good at managing time. And when I talk to them, it doesn't fall out of the sky. We all learn differently, and learning how to manage your time, the only way you learn how to manage it is to go through the stress of realizing you need to manage it. It's not pretty, but they figure it out. And they are definitely pushed to have to figure that out. So I would say for students have to make a choice. And I think one of the reasons it's not so much the academic day, that's what I was saying. If there's something that draws them away from the academic portion of the day, it is going to be tough for them to get in those 7 subjects. But otherwise, it's very doable. We have students that are definitely, they were in the play, they play sports. I'm not saying that they have a lot of extra time on their hands, but it is doable. The one thing I did want to point out that makes the DP program so different from the other programs too is that besides having all these internal assessments, they have the May exams, which we're not having this year, but the internal assessments are moderated by IB. In other words, they're double scored. And so that's really great feedback for us as a school. The teachers will get feedback from IB as to whether they were too harsh in their grading or too lenient in their assessment of student work. And so it's the one place in the program where across all the subjects, teachers are going to be getting that feedback, and it helps us to stay somewhat standardized with what IB expects our students to be doing. So I know that's more than what you're asking, Chip. Did I answer the rest of your question?
No, I think you answered it. I guess I would say it's going to be important for the district as we go along through IB to look at not just student achievement from how many DP students we have and how well they do, but how it does interact or change with their school experience to some degree. And it may change their quote credentials where they're going on to the next step. And in this very competitive world of whatever it is, colleges or especially. Yeah. So I would hope that we're just into this new, okay? And,
right.
You know, we don't have a lot of peers, from what I can understand, across the country in a way that we can assess these kinds of things, especially from the DP program. It's what I'm.
The other thing I should not ignore is there's also 29 certificate candidates in the first cohort, and some of those are earning a certificate in just one course, and we have some students who are earning as many as 4 certificates. So you know, that's almost half of our senior class is involved in either being a full DP candidate or a certificate candidate to some degree. And if they're a certificate candidate, they don't have to write the extended essay or do the CAS experiences or take the IB version of TOK. So that changes their experience somewhat. But we've had students, I have one full DP candidate that's also in my chemistry class. She asked me to send in a recommendation. She got into some really great schools, and Princeton put her on the wait list. And so she wanted me to write her another recommendation. We have another candidate that got into the California universities, which is really difficult as an out-of-state student to get into USC. And I do think, like you said, Chip, it's a really competitive world, and it does open up some other opportunities for our.
Yeah, the other thing I would just add to that in terms of the program itself is I think there's a misconception, and I understand why, about the DP program being an all or nothing program. And, you know, in most schools across the world, like ours, not international schools where students are going and everybody is a DP candidate, a full DP candidate. It offers the ability to take all these different kinds of courses, not necessarily all of them together as part of the diploma, but to be able to take 2 or 3 classes offered within the IB diploma program. So because of our focus on IB for all, we are not like some places where the goal is to have every student be a diploma candidate. The idea for us is to give that access to every student to take 1 course, 2 courses, 5 courses, whatever works for them. And I think as we've started and as we began, there has been a really strong community focus on the DP program is being a full DP candidate. And that's not really true. The DP program is expansive and offers so many things, but we are just at the very beginning of this process. So we have a lot more learning to do, I think, as a community about it.
That's my point too. I think just hopefully we can watch that and see it as it goes, because I totally support it all. Don't get me wrong there, but I just want to make sure we don't lose ground in one place because we are so focused in another. So.
Victoria, then Mary Heather.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on something that Courtney had said about the 5-year goals. And I wondered if she might be able to, or maybe Joy, I assume, has the same, they do the same process in PYP, about the 5-year goals, like what some examples of those might be and whether or not they're looking at student outcomes and sort of tracking progress and improvement, or if there are other types of goals.
In the MYP, we have a range of different standards and practices. So an example of one of our goals in the next 5 years is to rewrite our ACSD IB language policy, which isn't a board policy, but it's a sort of a small P policy where we outline across grades 6 through 10 how we encourage language learning in all of our classes, and not necessarily world language learning, just language development in general. So writing across the curriculum, reading and literacy across the curriculum, how we maybe make our curriculum more universal to make it more accessible to students with different language learning needs. So that's one example. Another example that comes to the top of my mind from our verification visit is looking at inquiry and how do we hold tight to our proficiencies that we've set and our assessment criteria and our consistent curriculum that we've written, and also open up opportunities for inquiry in the classroom so that students are leading the learning sort of alongside their teachers. Those are 2 examples.
Thank you. Mary Heather, then Lindsay.
Thank you. I guess I have 2 questions, and it's sort of a follow-up a little bit to Chip's comments. One, I'd be curious to know whether you all have started to gather information or feedback from students on the student perspective on the IB program, much like you did with the educator perspective. I'm just curious whether you've initiated getting student feedback on that at multiple levels, not just high school level, but middle years as well as primary years, to the extent that you can. But then the other question I have is, that transition from MYP to DP. And I know obviously a lot of effort has been put into getting everything authorized and, off the ground and running. But I'm curious about those students for whom DP is not necessarily best for them. And, I know the cohorts have kind of hovered around maybe 30 to 40 students. I'm not sure what the current junior year number is, but so we're kind of, DP is really focused on a pretty small number of students. And I know Peter has indicated, the IB and the benefits of IB is not limited to diploma program. Obviously, students can take advantage of getting certificates and experiencing IB at the high school or at the, junior and senior years, and not necessarily be fully involved in DP. But I'm just curious, of all the other students, it's probably 100 students, 90 students, how those students are catered to with IB, and specifically how the IB program in general is supporting those kids who may not be the right candidates to take on the rigor of the full diploma program. But I'm just curious, what you all have to say about how IB serves those students and will continue to serve those students in the future. So I just love your feedback on that. Thanks.
So I was going to say this when I was responding to Chip's question, is that almost all the current grade 11 and 12 classes are DP classes. And so the certificate candidates, the full DP candidates, they're sprinkled throughout, and especially in the first year, they're sprinkled throughout all the classes. So students are involved in the DP program, and they might not even realize they are, but they're taking, let's say, DP standard level biology for MUHS credit. They're getting the same course. So they might not feel like they are a certificate candidate because they're not going on to year 2 maybe, but they're getting the same exact experience in year 1. They also have the luxury of having flexibility. They can choose whatever courses they want to take because they're not bound to a prescribed requirements. But almost all of our courses are DP courses, so they are involved in the DP. Some of the internal investigations happen at the end of year 1. So students, and I have in year 2, right now in chemistry, I have a couple of students that just really enjoyed chemistry. They were surprised and they decided to take year 2 as well. And so they had to do the internal investigation just like the certificate and diploma candidates had to do it. It allows, we as teachers, we've said, let's allow them a little more flexibility in their work, but we use the same rubrics to assess the work. So they're very much involved in the DP program.
Is it okay if I answer the first part of Mary Heather's question about students? I think we probably should collect more student feedback, and I'd love to hear Henry's perspective too. But one thing, and Mark asked me this question when he was interviewing us for the video, what would a student say if I asked them, how is IB going for you? And I don't know if this is a frustration or a bad reality, but I think it's really hard, whether we had IB or not, for at least a 6th through 10th grader to say, now that my teachers are really calibrating their assessment practices, I feel so much more secure in my educational experience, or now that my units have really been backwards designed, I'm a lot happier. And I only bring that up to say, so much of our framework is behind the scenes in strengthening what we offer kids, and maybe we should talk about that with them more, but so much of it has been sort of building what's behind the curtain, like the scaffolding that you don't see when you walk into class. But I think Mary Heather's point is really, really good, to survey our students and see what they think. I was sitting with a student today working with her on her personal project, and she had a lot of feedback for me about her personal project. So,
well, and I guess,
yeah, go ahead.
I want to clarify in student feedback. I mean, I think particularly with DP, the focus is so much on our high achieving students. And I think it's really important as a district for us to offer everything that we can offer to those students. But I also I have in mind that we're still kind of making an accessible curriculum, and I'm wondering about those students who are not the high achieving students, and whether their IB experience is as good.
Mark?
Hi there. Yeah, so I'm Mark, officially tech integrator, but embedded in the teacher and learning crew there. I just wanted to pipe up because as part of the process of doing that video, we did start speaking to students, but there was just so much content that we had to break it down. So I personally spoke to 6 or 7 students and got feedback, and our plan is to sort of break it down and do that and with parents as well, because we also started speaking to parents and getting their feedback, but it was just so many perspectives. And so that is in the pipeline to do. Also, being new to the district, I understand your concern with DP program seemingly to be very academic. But one of the things that really excites me is all the different pathways available in the district, which is different from any IB school I've been in, as Peter said, which is different from a typical international school that does the IB. It's basically DP program or nothing. Where this, in your district, all the students are so lucky, and in the fact that they can have all these different choices. And I think we also need to get out of our minds in terms of talking about high achievers being those people who are academically minded. They're just different achievers. And we've got lots of different achievers who are who achieve highly in other areas. So we need to sort of get out of this mindset that it's just about the academic people who are high achievers and all the rest we have to sort of cater for. They can still achieve in what I see the district has to offer, whether it's career related or otherwise.
Thank you, Mark. Lindsay, and then Amy.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. So what I first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's talking about IB tonight, you know, carving out some time in your night to share about this with us. Thank you so much. It's, you know, what you've shared has answered many of my questions. And I guess what I wanted to say is sort of building on what Chip and Mary Heather started with. And I think it was Caitlin who was used the expression IB for all. And that really, like, you know, I wrote that down because I feel like that's a misconception that it is for the typical academic high achievers. And, you know, I'm really curious and want to learn more about how IB is made accessible to achievers of all styles, you know, to gain the benefits of IB, which are not just academic, but, you know, what you alluded to about the framework behind it. You know, so how, you know, what are some of the things you do to create that access? And, you know, do you adapt lessons for special education programs or people, you know, specifically within an IEP or a 504? You know, I think it's really great to have heard what you have to say, but you know, I'd like to learn more about that, because that is the majority of the classes aren't doing the, you know, DP, but it's great to hear about the certifications. And you know, is there a, you know, some specific details on the ACSD website? I guess I need to go in and look for that. I haven't seen that specifically yet. So thank you guys.
And Caitlin, just before you respond, for clarification point, the DP program is an experience that only our 11th and 12th graders are accessing, correct? And so IB is something that these kids are experiencing starting at the very beginning of their ACSD experience, and only till at the end does it formalize for some around this DP role, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that as we as a board start to listen and get access to, and I think in our language, it's not so much that IB is a thing, but IB is a way. And how do we as a district start to get that language out there that this is an approach, a framework, not just this thing called an IB diploma or DP diploma?
Yeah, I think that's really great way of putting it, Mary, that IB is a way. And, you know, our IB curriculum is our tier 1 curriculum for most subject areas, right? So when we are delivering units and lessons to students, all of our students are all of our students, and we're obligated to design our lessons to meet a wide range of learning needs. And so, you know, we have professional learning that we have started and need to continue around universal design for learning, which involves designing your instruction to the edges so that you catch everybody. Really giving students a lot of choice, a lot of flexibility. The rubrics in the MYP are very stable, but they also, it's the same 4 criteria that we assess over and over again for 5 years in each content area. That's a lovely structure that lends itself to consistency in scoring and real credibility in how we report on students' learning as we calibrate our scoring over time. But there's so much flexibility for students to express their learning to be measured within those rubrics. And so there's really a lot of range. And we're working on developing comparable rubrics at the PYP level, and we're looking at making a more coherent transition from our MYP assessment model into our 11-12 assessment model to really, this is a work in progress. But we find, so I would say teachers are absolutely practicing designing their lessons for access and success, and they're strengthened by their collaboration with one another and their reflective practices. So thinking about, you know, having active conversations about what really worked well. This is a curriculum that emphasizes student agency and inquiry and really sparking students' curiosity. And our teachers are asking themselves and one another what worked well, and they're revising accordingly. And that all sounds really lovely, and we are also on a learning curve in doing that work well. So we'll keep working on doing that well. And meanwhile, you'll see when we talk about COVID recovery and ESSER funds later, we see basic foundational literacy and basic computational skills as being really critical points of foundational knowledge for students to be able to access the curriculum. And so we are going, when we're leaning into foundational literacy building, we really understand that as part of our IB for All vision, making sure that all students can read and write well so that they can do as much as possible within this curriculum.
Great. We'll go to Amy, and then we'll, for sake of time, this has been, for me personally, just the most fun in a while. So thank you all. But we'll go to Amy and then end with Barb so these folks can get the rest of their evening back.
Great, thank you. And actually the last question and answer was much of what I wanted to talk about. Because so for me, what struck me about that video last week was teachers talking about how they have changed their practice and how they've seen that in terms of the effect on students. For example, the language teacher talking about how students get globalization in a way that they didn't in the way that she used to teach language. So you were sort of foreshadowing, Caitlin, where I wanted to go with that, which is to ask our coordinators, you know, how I mean, just the language teachers were using in that around how they're talking about it, and that you could see that there were the foundational skills as well as the upper level you know, moving up the taxonomy of what the kind of critical thinking and inquiry that students were doing. So my question is, can you say more about that? Can you talk more about what you're seeing and how teachers are viewing that change, if they were going to reflect back? And then since we do have Henry, to put him on the spot maybe a little bit and see if you know, since he went through elementary and middle school before there was IB, and You know, do you have any observations that you are willing to share or think would be useful to share with us? And I'll stop there. Thank you, though. Just thank you. It's been fabulous.
Why don't we let Henry answer first?
Can you just repeat the question? I didn't hear it completely.
The first part of my question was not directed at you, but my last part, which is, since we've been talking about, you know, how you're maybe taking some of the same courses, but it's how the discussion is going, or the level of inquiry or way it's being taught. And I'm wondering if you have seen, you know, you went through the system in the years before IB, and you know, is there any observation from the student perspective that you can share? And it's fine if not. I'm just curious, since we've been talking about it, whether or not you had something to share in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I would say definitely freshman and sophomore year, there was less focus, I would say, on IB principles, I guess you could say. And maybe that was just because we're relatively new into this process and it hadn't been integrated as much. But I'd say that as we've gone throughout the years, especially throughout my high school career, the IB principles have been integrated more, and it's much more apparent that we're an IB school. And maybe I'm a little biased because I'm in the DP program and I have to deal with that a lot, but I'd say overall, IB is definitely clearly integrated into our school.
Thanks, great.
Yeah.
Great. One thought I had about the first part of your question makes me think of our collaboration time that we have at the high school, where all members of a department, an academic department, meet twice weekly for 80 minutes to coordinate their DP and MYP curriculum. But I bring that up because I think our individuals and societies department and our language and literature departments each have a unit on globalization that sort of formed organically within those two departments. And then they realized, oh, we both have these units, and they're working to have them fall at the same time during the year. But one thing we heard in that video was that prior to this work, depending on which 9th grade classroom you were in, you might have had that unit, you might not have had that unit. So having our faculty work together to name what the units are by grade level, I think gives students more of a chance to have a consistent opportunity, therefore more shared language, such as around your specific example of globalization. And if I can just put my parent hat on for a moment, the PYP teachers have done so much work to articulate their units across the grade levels. And I hear, you know, at the soccer field, I hear 3rd graders from Mary Hogan talking to 3rd graders from Cornwall, to 3rd graders from any town who's there. Have you had this unit yet? Oh, we moved into our you know, patterns in natural disasters unit now. Oh, did you do this? And to me, that is so powerful to hear the kids from our district talking about which units they've had and what activities they're doing.
Thank you, Courtney.
I just wanted to add to that, Amy, that I would talk about collaboration time as well. That's just been so powerful for teachers to have that time twice a week. It really supports the teachers. Some teachers just have you know, we all have different strengths, and to bring together people in that one content area to help each other in creating methodical units really benefits everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Barb, last question, and
okay.
then we'll move on the agenda.
Awesome. So since for some reason my life has been surrounded with several people that has had Asperger's syndrome, kind of on the autism spectrum, I wonder how individuals like that, where they may be kind of really focused and very focused in a particular area and could even be brilliant, how they are doing in this kind of a program. And if in fact they did do just certificate program, have we seen any indication that colleges might look down upon that? The fact that they haven't done the DP program? I would hate for there to be some stigma associated with that.
Being so early in our program, only having our first cohort as seniors right now, I don't have enough data to really answer that, but I can tell you that I have, out of the 28 in this senior cohort, 6 people had accommodations or plans, and I have to contact IB by mid-October. It's very early for those accommodations to be approved for their May exams, but they are very accommodating. Anything that I asked for, I was able to get. So I was able to get students if they needed, because of maybe having a concussion, if they needed to have their text on light blue paper to help with headaches, they were willing to do that. If they needed extended time, they give up to 50% more time and extended time. So they're very accommodating. But to answer your specific question about being on the spectrum, we just don't have enough data yet for me to answer that.
And have we started to record statistics, possibly even from a social economic perspective, of those that are taking advantage of the programs, just so we have some good data for the future?
We're definitely going to be recording data on each cohort as we move through, not only who they are as far as the demographic makeup, but we'll be looking at their final scores. And, you know, it's just good for us to keep a data bank on our progress. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. So on behalf of the board, everyone, thank you so much for your time, for sticking with us, having it extend to another meeting, and most importantly, for your continued passion and work in this area. It's what makes us who we are, and it's the most important things that we should be talking about. So thank you very, very much, and have a great evening.
We're so grateful.
Next up, Peter.
So the next item is a presentation on ESSER, and we've been giving updates to the board regarding, you know, the fact that we were getting ESSER and some of the planning we've been doing around that. So we wanted to kind of put it all into a presentation to share where we are now. That we're not done yet. We are through ESSER 1, and we have 2 and 3 left. 2 and 3 are the larger grant funds that we're getting. So Caitlin's going to talk a little bit about ESSER funds, kind of what we've allocated for ESSER 1, where we're looking at for ESSER 2 and 3. Again, our recovery planning, this also, you know, kind of connects directly to the recovery planning we're doing and looking ahead to what kinds of structures we're putting in place next year. I think I mentioned to the board in my last update that we want to be thoughtful about how we spend these funds, that we don't want to create a number of positions that we can't sustain, or that are part of a system that we may develop that will then fall away completely when the ESSER funds go. We are working alongside other districts throughout the state and throughout the country in determining how we approach this. So we are certainly not alone in this process. We are meeting with other districts, with other student services directors, other curriculum directors, other superintendents, to kind of talk through what they're doing. There are talks at the state level and regional level around how do we maximize these funds as a state. So we're still, honestly, we're still kind of at the beginning phases of this. As I said, ESSER 1 is smaller, 2 and 3 are larger, and you know, as we get to these larger amounts of money, I think we'll want to be, it will be a little bit more challenging to use the funds in a way that don't create a cliff at the end of the next 3 years. So that's kind of a runway for Caitlin to take it away, present the slides, and get into it.
Great. I am going to share my screen, which means I think it'll be hard for me to see you. So speak up if you want me to pause and answer a question. This is just a handful of slides that are information out with then opportunity to converse. We are learning more and more about ESSER and recovery every week. The Agency of Education has a standing meeting on Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. They call it Coffee and Conversations, and I show up and just listen to what we know now about what money is coming, what the expectations are for recovery planning, how we'll document things, all of the details. So this just attempts to synthesize what we know now from sort of official messaging from the AOE and how we're acting on that. So ESSER is Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. It's 3 grants, all of which fall under different federal acts. So ESSER 1 is part of the CARES Act, ESSER 2 part of the CRRSA Act, ESSER 3 part of the ARPA Act. At any rate, they're just slices of these acts giving federal funding to schools in the form of grants. ESSER 1, it's awarded in proportion to Title I funds. This is actually true of all 3 of the ESSER funds. So because we as a district receive Title I funds, we're receiving ESSER funds proportionally. The ESSER 1, they describe it as emergency relief funds to address the impact that COVID has had and continues to have on elementary and secondary schools across the nation. That's really broad. Just to give you a sense of what we're allowed to spend it on, we can spend it on PPE, cleaning supplies, training and sanitization, technology across a range of ways, mental health, summer programming, addressing equity needs, really thinking about students with disabilities, students experiencing homelessness, migrant students, all of those categories, addressing learning loss, facility repairs, and on and on. I mean, the list is long, and so rather than list them all, I linked to the documents where the first link at the bottom is to the AOE memo where one of the places where they've listed all of these allowable uses. And the other link is one I found today as I was looking for how to synthesize this, the side-by-side of how we can spend ESSERs 1, 2, and 3 differently. So again, really broad categories of spending here. So ESSER 2, in ESSER 2, the AOE messaging encourages us to braid our ESSER 2 funds with other federal funds. So Title 2, Title 4, Title 1, various other grants that we receive, and to align our spending with statewide recovery priorities. So the recovery framework emphasizes, this is socio-emotional, it's social, emotional, functioning, mental health and well-being, student engagement and truancy, and academic achievement and success. And so you'll see that there's overlap between our ESSER funds and our COVID recovery plan. They're not the same, but they're intentionally touching each other based on the way that the AOE has rolled them out. ESSER 3 has a couple of specific requirements. We need to set aside 20% to address, for activities to address learning loss. And we need to develop and make publicly available a plan for, quote, safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services. And we have to seek public comment on that plan. Now, the AOE has given us directives on our COVID recovery plan. And my understanding is that that COVID recovery plan, which I'll talk about at the end of this slideshow, should check this box as a ESSER 3 requirement. Doing that plan as directed by the AOE meets this. So that's the basic overview of those 3 grants. And here are our allocations and timelines. Over the next 3 years, ACSD is receiving $5.2 million in ESSER grant funds. The first $403,402 was ESSER 1. We had to apply. We had to submit an application for that by March 20th, or we would forfeit those funds. And so we did. We applied for those funds. We can revise the application as we need to, but we had to submit it. The obligation deadline is September 30th, 2022. ESSER 2 is open. We could apply for it right now, but we haven't. The application deadline is November 1. Peter made the point that we want to be really thoughtful in our investments to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for a fall in 2023 when these funds expire. And so we're sort of moving slowly to do this effectively, to budget effectively. So as I said, we submitted an application for ESSER 1 and we have approved investments. They include contracting with, I think it's CSAC, to bring in 2 more school-based clinicians to fill gaps in our service model there. We had an SEL coordinator serving only Mary Hogan, and we used ESSER funds to expand that position to serve all of our district elementary schools. We are in the process of hiring a literacy interventionist to make sure that we have equitable supports across all 7 elementary schools to provide literacy support to students who are struggling. And we are just kicking off the process of hiring a literacy coordinator. So this will be a person who works very deeply with literacy data, works closely with leaders at the district level to consider the resources that we have, make sure that we're distributing them to meet student needs, and then works with teachers to do to really use their classroom-based data to inform instruction, in some cases providing instructional coaching. And finally, we've got a half-time position posted and in the hiring process for a preschool and early childhood transitions coordinator. This is a half-time position that would coordinate our remaining school-based programs, really support students in transitioning from preschool into kindergarten, which is a role we've seen done to great effect up in the Mount Abe district, and we're replicating elements of it here. And co-lead with our leadership team a visioning process for the future of preschool in ACSD. As we finish our facilities master planning process, we know preschool is one of the things that we need to talk about. And we really felt like we needed to build capacity internally, both to strengthen what we're doing currently and to help us set that vision for where we're going with preschool over time. So those are our approved ESSER 1 allocations. And they connect, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but to our recovery plan areas of focus. And you can see in bold, you know, the AOE has asked us to focus on social emotional wellness, academic success, and engagement and truancy. And so we, Peter has said multiple times that this recovery plan isn't a new thing, rather it really is a frame for supporting the work that we're already doing that has already been identified as really important. So as I said when we were talking about IB, we'll be leaning into literacy and math and data-driven decision-making in our instruction processes. So because we understand those as foundational to really realizing our goal of IB for all, making sure students have the basic learning skills to access that high-level curriculum. And we're focusing, continuing our focus from the system of services design teamwork on inclusive instructional practices and having really robust systems in place to support success for all students, and focusing on social emotional learning as a priority, not only for students, but also for the adults in our community. So that's sort of our vision for our COVID recovery. Our initial needs assessment was submitted to the AOE on April 16th and approved on the 22nd. And we have to submit a recovery plan on June 1st. This link takes you to what the AOE has rolled out in terms of what we need to do with this recovery planning. And as I mentioned, ESSER funds and COVID recovery plans are not the same thing. They're 2 different bodies of things that we're grappling with from the federal and state level, but they're intentionally overlapping. So the COVID recovery planning requires a really strong data-informed plan to recover learning loss and really redesign systems as we come out of COVID. And the needs assessment and the planning that we do there should and does and will impact our planning for how we allocate these ESSER funds, which are, as I mentioned, they're coming to us between now and 2023, and then they expire. So we need to be really thoughtful about what we do with those.
Caitlin, could you talk a little bit about, given that last statement and given the focus that the majority of these investments are in personnel, and assuming that those personnel costs would then continue year over year, is the thinking that this ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds would support continuing those roles for the next few years? Is that how you all are thinking about that?
Yep, so the slideshow is in board pack, and so you have access to those links that are in there where you can go deeper if you want to. And if you look at the link on the ESSER 1 approved investment slide, it shows you how that grant language is actually written, and it has in parentheses, in most of them, maybe all of them, intention to extend this position into a second year with ESSER 2 funds. So we've sort of already planned that, but also each of these positions will either need to be made sustainable over time with local budgets or other grant budgets, or sort of have designed obsolescence in it, right? So if we can have a literacy coordinator who builds strong enough systems that then we can push those systems into continued sustainability at the teacher and principal level or the teacher and curriculum team level, then some of these positions might not need to be continued after 2 or 3 years. So they're posted that way, right? So they say grant funded for 2 years with possibility of extending.
Okay, thank you. Peter, then Barb.
Thanks. That was actually one of my questions, which was we talked about not starting staff positions or whatever that we couldn't sustain over time. And I was going to actually ask about the literacy coordinator, but it's good to hear that it's being posted as a grant funded position. So my other question would be, I know under ESSER 3, I think you referred to like a 20% set aside, and I know part of that has to go to after school or summer programming. I'm just curious to know what the plan is with that. And then my only other question would be, we got to spend $5 million to take full advantage of it. Are there other areas we're looking at that are one-time spending, such as capital needs that might qualify under ESSER 1, 2, or 3?
We're certainly, I think capital needs would be a very helpful place to be able to spend some of the funding. Of course, we want to make sure that we use the funding that we have to first, I think, tackle the academic and social and emotional needs of students. It's not yet clear in terms of what we can use the funds for. So that's something that is a conversation at the state level. As you know, the legislature has taken up the study this year, or the conversation has been happening about putting together the study and the assessment of Vermont's facilities to determine how we're going to put funding back into schools, which has been on hold for over a decade. So yeah, I think that's a real need for us. I think it's a need for a lot of districts in the state. And I think if that is allowed, I think you'll see that most districts will use some of the funding for that. I think the other thing I would add in terms of what Caitlin was sharing about, the kind of planned obsolescence and where else we can use these funds. Another area is bringing in expertise in developing the systems that we've been working towards for a number of years. So we've spent a lot of time over the last year in starting to put together our strategic plan. So looking at support for strategic planning, the equity work that we are engaged in and that will be leaning into much more strongly next year as we come out of the pandemic. So bringing in expertise in those areas would be really helpful. So I'm thinking about professional development and also help in terms of building structures here that will last, that aren't human resource dependent, but things that normally we don't have the funding to do, that now we have the ability to potentially bring in more resource from outside of Vermont, for example.
The other half of the question was, I think that ESSER 3's got a set aside that's supposed to be devoted towards expanded learning opportunities, summer and after school.
It does, and we have one of our focus teams, our recovery planning focus teams, looking at summer and after school. it's hard really right now to think about how we scale something up that is meaningful and effective this summer. We've crafted a couple of surveys that we need to run through some checks to make sure that we're collecting the information that we need, but really to assess both our family's appetite for summer learning and our staff's willingness and ability and capacity to teach it. So money is not the object in this context, which is lovely. It's really human energy. And so we have a lot of information to gather about what we can, before we understand really what we can pull off for this summer, but we do have a team working on it. And I think that our goal this year is to really take programs that already exist in our schools and as much as possible strengthen those, expand them as we're able, but really look to the future in terms of what can we provide more coherently over time. So you're right, Peter, it needs our attention and we're working on it.
And our recovery planning team, which is our representative group that's been leading us through the pandemic from March, is meeting this week, and that is the main focus of our conversation is summer and after school. So we're under some pressure now to get some things in place, and we're working towards that. And I'm talking about things beyond what we, currently normally offer.
Great, Barb, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Excellent. First, I applaud the emphasis on math and literacy. That's very well needed. Recently, talking to several constituents, I discovered that we don't have math textbooks, and possibly there's other topics as well where we don't have math textbooks in our middle school. And I would hope that we could use some of this money to purchase that one-time, need. Having, studied math myself and had the opportunity to help many students, a textbook is just so vital. And number one, others helping to make sure you're teaching them the way the textbook and how it's being taught. But number two, students learn differently, and you need that book to be able to really work problems until you really get it. And, for the folks that I've helped succeed, including my stepson, it was really just, forcing him to sit down and let's work these problems and it's going to finally click, and it did. And now he has a PhD in computational fluid dynamics. So I just would hope that we could use some of this money, if this is true, that we don't have textbooks at the middle school level for mathematics and some other areas, that we could use some of this money for these vital books.
It is true. It is. They haven't had textbooks because they didn't request them in the past, and they have requested them recently. And so there was a curriculum designed without them, without textbooks, and now there's a request to bring them in. And that's honestly, Barb, I hadn't put the two things together yet, so it's a helpful comment.
Thank you. So I'll hope. Thank you.
Great.
Well,
next up, Peter.
The real benefit, just to add to the move of 6th grade to MUMS, there's a huge math benefit to that as well, which we can go into later.
As long as we have some textbooks, I'll be happy.
That's the easy part.
Okay, cool.
Okay, next up, Peter.
Just a quick update on the meeting. We put this agenda topic in prior to the state board meeting on Ripken secession, and so just wanted to give the board a quick update. I attended the meeting. I was asked to attend to answer any questions. I never spoke during the meeting, and it didn't get to me. Some of you may have watched the video, and so you know pretty much as I know now. I haven't heard anything additionally from our legal counsel, Chris Leopold, who is representing ACSD. I believe he's going to be talking with Ripken's counsel and with Donna Russo Savage in the week ahead to kind of piece together what occurred at the board meeting and prepare for May. What I had been told previously was that in May, we would come to the state board meeting, that next meeting in May, and present a response to the question, is ACSD, can ACSD continue to exist as a district? It's part of the statute. It's designed for breakups when a district maybe is already pretty small and the largest district might leave and you have a smaller district left or a few left. So I think it should be fairly straightforward in terms of what we're required to do. I should be getting more information on that, as I said, in the week ahead. I shared with all of you in just a quick note that the outcome of the meeting didn't go, I think, as planned, and the state board did pretty much table their decision about the first question, which was, I don't remember the language exactly, but it's essentially, can Ripton run a K-12 system or have the ability to run an educational system for its students? And those of you that have watched know the questions that the state board was going through. They did mention that there are challenges with the statute and understanding the statute. So I think that's part of the work that's happening. And what the state board chair requested was for Donna Russo Savage to provide more guidance to the state board regarding the scope of the statute and how to kind of operate in that May meeting when they take up this question again.
Any questions for Peter on where we are in the process? Barb, your hand is up, but it didn't go down from the last one, so I'm assuming that, okay, great. Okay, Peter, anything else on that? Super. So just to reiterate, so we're not sure of our role in May just yet.
Right.
Great, okay. All right, next on the agenda, report of the board. So what we wanted to do during this session, there's been a couple of ideas or comments that have been raised by other board members with regards to, and by Peter, with regards to the agenda process, or not the agenda process, format is probably a better word. And while I'm going to recommend that we continue this discussion during our retreat and make decisions at the retreat so that when we kick off the new school year, any changes to the format of these meetings would be starting then. A couple of things have been raised and would love folks' feedback at this point on them. The first is the introduction of what's referred to as a consent agenda. And so in the consent agenda, we could choose which items we would fall into the consent agenda so that, for instance, bills could fall into that, perhaps the minutes, and then that entire bucket is approved as opposed to going through individual components. If, like tonight, there was a specific adjustment to one of the items that was in a consent agenda list, that item would be pulled out of the consent agenda, would be addressed separately, and then we would move forward with just approving those things in the consent agenda. So that's one that has been raised to offer a little bit more perhaps efficiency in some of the more repetitive and housekeeping-like things that we do on during our board meetings. Any comments or thoughts on that? Chip.
I appreciate trying to shorten the meetings and to make them more efficient, but I haven't, it seems what sort of fills our meeting times at times totally correctly, or just like the discussion on IB. And I guess I would need a little more information as to whether it is just as efficient to continue to do what we do, meaning comment on the minutes, approve them. Somebody reads the bills. It's not that I have any reason I want to read the bills, for Pete's sakes. However, it just seems like, it may be a little bit more complicated trying to put it all together and then having to pull it out and work with it, especially in the minutes. And if there are many other things that would go into a consent agenda that I'm not aware of, I pulled up and read a little about consent agendas, and some of the things didn't really apply to us as a school board, so to speak. So I know other places do it. I know Mount Abe does it because my daughter's on that board. And so I'm open to flexibility for sure, but I'm not sure at this point in time that putting bills and minutes in a consent agenda and voting once is going to save us more than maybe about 30 seconds. But that's my opinion.
Peter B., could you add additional color to this, given your
It's not a very exciting topic, so I'm not sure I can do that, but I'll try. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing with the consent, it's not just about time, but it's also just kind of about the things that board members do prior to a meeting to review, and then you kind of like get that, like reading reports. So there's a formality to it, I think, which is helpful. We would also put like all the hiring that happens and have like the names of people that like during contract time, and put the names of those employees in there too as part of a consent agenda. So there are other things that would be included in the consent agenda. Like you said, I mean, a lot of other boards do use consent agendas. Historically in ACSU, ID4 did. So I know Lorraine and Victoria are accustomed to that. Do either of you have anything to share?
No, in fact, I don't really even, I don't feel like the way we did it at ID4 was different from the way we do it now. In terms of like meeting prep and that sort of thing, it's the same, it felt the same.
And for a question of order, like, does consent agenda have to always be? Or if there was a meeting that had a big bucket of stuff that we could package together, can you do consent agenda that time and not during the other times?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, I mean, I think you want to have consistency. I mean, that's my bias. So I think if you do have a consent agenda and you don't have anything to put in there, I don't think you have to warn your agenda with consent agenda on it. But
Lorraine?
Yeah, the consent agenda at ID4 is not the same like consent agenda that the Hannaford Career Center uses. And I actually, the Hannaford Career Center one, it seems like we're always, like if there's a problem with the minutes, then we have, like Linda, our board secretary, clerk, whatever, the one who takes our minutes, is constantly reminding people, well, no, you got to pull it out and then you got to put it here. You got to do this, you got to do that. I personally would prefer to just keep it the way it is. I don't see any advantage to the consent agenda. I find it kind of, it creates more issues to get it right, how the proper way to pull things out and put things back in and move them here and move them there. I don't see that it's a big time saver.
Great. Any other comments on that one? Super. Not a big fan club for consent agenda, noted. Probably something that we won't be implementing. The next item that was tossed out there from some folks was at the end of every meeting, having a formal process in which the board would review the board. And while it was brought brought to our attention as something that's happening at the end of every meeting. It was then suggested by a couple other folks, could it be at the end of every quarter? So there's variation in time. So I think tonight, if we could talk about in concept, we can worry about how often and how and details of that. But would love to get folks' feedback on in concept at some interval, having a formal process in which the board is reviewing the operations of a meeting as a board. Thoughts?
Just to clarify, which is different from, say, coupling an evaluation of the board's ability to work and achieve its goal on an annual basis that we would, say couple with the superintendents. This is more just about how we operate in a meeting.
The way that it was presented was that this discussion, this as it falls into the agenda format, would mean adding to our agenda at some interval of reflection on how we as a board are operating in our board meetings. There's a separate discussion, I think, also that we should be doing at the retreat in how we continue to formalize our own evaluation as a board, which is not the same thing as having that discussion at a board meeting, every board meeting or every other board meeting or whatever. Thoughts on that? Suzanne?
So I'm the one that brought it up, and
well, you did bring it up, and then other people have brought it up as well, so don't.
I'll take my shoulders are broad, they can take the blame. So basically what I was thinking of is a way of the board to take 2 minutes at the end of every meeting and just say, how did we do as a group of individuals that are here serving our communities? Were we respectful to each other? Were we mindful of airtime? Did we follow our board policies and our board ethics? And just a couple questions of how we did. Did we follow the agenda? Did we get bogged down in one item? And maybe when we had set the agenda, maybe we should have thought in advance that the board would be really excited about that one topic, and we'd get kind of stuck there, and we did. So just two minutes to just do it, and you could do a Word document or something, and you could record it, or you could just do it verbally and be done with it and go on about your business. But it's just a way of checking in with yourself and other board members about how you all did as a group.
Peter, then Amy, then Lindsay.
I guess I know that this is something that a lot of boards that use policy governance do. And so, I wouldn't want to just sort of have it be a free for all of, hey, how did, kind of a vague, hey, how are we doing? But it should be scored against very specific, we need to reflect back on the policies that govern the board as it operates in meetings. I certainly wouldn't want to do it every meeting, but I think on a regular interval, that's fine. But to have it be that we're talking about some pretty specific things like the board's policy, and did we hear to Robert's rules? Did we hear to policy? That kind of thing. And I guess I would ask Suzanne, since I think that the Hannaford Career Center does that, just to kind of give us an example of a post-meeting dialogue that might take place that you've had in the past 6 months or something.
Over at the Career Center, someone either puts their hand up and says they're willing to do a quick reflection on the meeting, or I might end up having to choose someone. And typically, they start off with the meeting, how the meeting ran. Were people prepared for the meeting? Meaning, were you able to ask questions, and were there any sidebar conversations occurring? We used to have a lot of people that would sit there and have conversations with each other and interrupt the board meeting. And since some people brought those up, those have ceased to pretty much exist. Is everyone participating? So it's just basically about good meeting manners and, you know, being a good board member. So that's pretty much what we've done. I know Mount Abe does it, and they go into agenda setting. They ask questions about how the board chair ran the meeting. Yes, at the Career Center, they will critique my ability to lead the meetings. Yeah, I mean, Lorraine sits on the board too. She could give feedback too on that one.
Thank you. That was good to know about.
Amy, then Lindsay.
A couple thoughts. One is, it certainly makes sense after we have our retreat and we think about and we set out our own board goals, and we could also have a conversation about norms and what we, you know, how do we define a good meeting? What do we see as the ideal meeting? So then we have something to compare it against. Not that we, you know, can't do something now, but I think that would be helpful if we're gonna go down this path. But then the other thought is, you know, in facilitation of meetings, there's a really easy plus delta process that is pretty simple, and you get a lot of information in a quick time, and it's just what went well, and then what didn't go well, or what not. You don't even say what didn't go well, you say what needs to change, or what would you like to see change for the next time. And that's pretty much it. So that's one simple way that we could have that conversation where it doesn't take a lot of time. There aren't distractions. There aren't, you know, we don't get hung up on minuscule things. It's just a quick brainstorm, and you know, it's good process to end meetings that way. So just thoughts.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, then Betty.
Hi. So I agree with the concept of this. I think it would be really helpful, but also to echo the sort of what's been mentioned about maybe it not being a free-for-all, some type of structure, whether it be as simple as like a plus delta process, or, you know, what benchmarks or metrics, you know, how I also would wonder what does constitute a good board meeting, you know, how are we measuring it? But I think it would be really helpful for me anyways, because there are people who have been on the board for so many years. You've sat through so many meetings, and some of them probably feel really rewarding and productive, and some of them probably feel super frustrating. And how do we, you know, what can we do so that we have the best possible meetings? And I think this could help with that. So
thank you. Betty, then Barb.
Great, thank you. I was gonna echo a lot of the thoughts that all of you have brought up, but also saying that I totally support including this in our agenda. Evaluating it'll help us in evaluating our overall performance as a board, making sure that we are staying focused on our vision or mission or goals as a board, and also help us in our overall agenda setting. If, say, something did not work in a previous meeting, that maybe in the next meeting when we're setting an agenda, we can either adjust or make adjustment to improve on the future board meetings. And I think also, if we cannot do it at every board meeting, at least once a month. But ideally, I think every board meeting is sounds okay to me.
Thank you. Barb?
And just real quick, and I think it's kind of been said already, but I think if we had just a simple form that we used of this is the criteria that we're gonna evaluate. So it's real structured. So we come up with an agreed to list, agenda, some of the things Suzanne stated that we could take a look at. And that way it'd be really easy. We just go down the list.
Great. All right, so Chip and then Peter.
Certainly what is a good board meeting is hard to describe. There is no doubt in my mind, having sat through many meetings of this and many other things, that the person who runs a meeting, and this is not a reflection on you, Mary, as the chair at this point at all, but the person who runs the meeting is a very important person, as how they structure it, how they get everybody involved, how all of that happens. And I think to be able to give that person feedback, not personally so much, but structurally, may be helpful. But I still think, I sat through, I don't know, 6, 7 board chairs in my early years, and there were some that were great, and some, talk about frustrating long meetings, they were unbearable. And it really related to a lot of it as to how the board chair and the people that have made the agenda for the rest of us carries it out, both time management, not stifling opinion or anything like that, but guiding it, not redundancy, all of those kinds of things which can make for a concise, action-oriented, but at times very informative. We didn't take any action on IB, but these 2 meetings that included it, we learned a lot, okay? All of us, even though some of us knew more than others, I'm sure. But I just think it shouldn't be just that we are learning, but we are directing the leadership, the board chair, whoever's running the meeting, to structure it in a way that's efficient and captures all of our feelings. We don't go away feeling we've been either stifled, cut out, whatever. So, thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? So this one, oh, Peter B.
Yeah, I mean, I just think related to what Barb mentioned about criteria, the 2 boards that have been mentioned are policy governance. And those of you who know policy governance know how it operates. If you don't, it may be interesting for you to just take a look and see, even just reading their policies. It's a very different way of operating. So I would just say that I think it's important, as the board is reflecting and learning together, that it also matches with the current structure, which is not policy governance. So I would just caution of taking a policy governance structure completely and placing it onto operations here. I think, as Barb mentioned, we don't necessarily have the criteria in the way that I think this procedure has been used at the Career Center and at Mount Abe. So just something to think about as we're looking at this.
Great. And Mary Heather, and then we'll move on.
So I just real briefly, I guess my 2 cents would be, I think we need to look at it much like we would look at, how we engage with the public and, what format we use. We need to ask ourselves the question, what are we trying to achieve here? What information are we trying to get? And let that help guide us in terms of whether we want to do this, how we want to do it, and what frequency.
Great. So I think what we have shown is that this is great. This is a content area that we will continue the discussion at the retreat. And it will give us an opportunity to bring more formality and consideration to this. And it seems as if something that we'll be able to work through and figure out. So we'll make sure that this is something that we add to that day. Okay, next on the agenda, policies. Mary G.
Okay, the policy committee has we're presenting 3 policies we'd like you to review. The first one is the personnel recruitment, selection, and appointment. This is a recommended policy from the Vermont State School Board, and it includes statutes in terms of hiring and you know, checking references, etc. So in the past, we had a procedure, and much of what the ACSD procedure is incorporated in this, but this is based on the model policy from the Vermont State School Board, and it's recommended. It's been in draft since I think 2019, February 2019, or maybe 18, and we had legal, Vicki Wells had our legal experts look at it, and they've approved what we've written, because it's basically what the Vermont State School Board has already looked at in terms of statute. The second policy is homeless students. This is a required policy as of October 2020. And we basically use the model policy put out by the Vermont State School Board Association. And we have a homeless student procedure that's well underway already. So again, the procedure is already in place. We just, we're required to now have a policy. And then the third one is the security and cameras in school. And this was a suggestion from the administration, because a number of principals said that there are situations in which cameras are used, and they need a policy about how to interpret or how to use the information on those from those camera captures. It's for security, but also sometimes in student behavior or various things that go on in the building around security. So we just would like you to review those and hope we can put them up for adoption possibly in the next month. Okay.
Great. So from a point of order perspective, folks, we'll get these on the agenda next to take action. And we're asking that board members become prepared during that board meeting, having read the policy, having any questions for clarifications, so that we will be able to adopt or not adopt those policies at that time.
Could I just ask one question regarding the hiring? Since we have a lot of that in procedure at this point, what is the benefit of having it in policy rather than procedure?
Well, often the policy comes first and then the procedure follows it. So basically, we just wanted to have a policy in place, and then the procedure was already there. So it's just kind of closing the gap, as I understand it.
Okay.
Maybe Peter has a better.
I think it's helpful to have this policy just for kind of down the line for other, other people that may be in these positions, both board positions and administrative positions. I think it's a good referent to have as a policy.
Okay, that's fine. I just was questioning.
Great. To the policy committee. Oh, sorry, Barb.
Yeah, thank you. For the B20, for the personal recruitment, it looks like under selection, there's a decision that has to be made of how the cost gets borne. Does that have to be made ahead of time? Will we do that as a board at the time we're basically approving it? It basically says the cost of such checks will be borne by the, in parentheses, prospective employee, comma, the school district. So I'm assuming that's kind of a choice that we get to make based on the template. And maybe I'm wrong.
I'm going to refer that to Peter.
You're on mute.
You see where I'm, it's under selection. It's on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading it.
Yeah, it's like the middle of the, maybe 2/3 of the way down in that number 1.
Yeah, and so it is the board's prerogative to choose that. I think we left it in there specifically to have the board have that conversation.
Those are currently, I mean, we do have current practice on that, right? We are, we,
Right, it's the employee.
yeah, the employee is responsible for that.
Okay, great. So Peter C?
Yeah, very quickly under cameras and security in school, number 9, the last sentence is Vicky will check. So just in case you need to cut that out or still have Vicky check on something.
I've checked everything. It's all good.
And next year at this time, when we have a question about it, we're going to call you.
Yeah.
As long as it's not 9 o'clock at night, I'm good with that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I noticed that later this afternoon that it was still in there. I'll have Sharon remove that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to the policy committee. Appreciate the work on this.
Thank you.
Anything, we don't have anything in other, I don't believe. Any others for other?
I had just a quick question.
Henry.
So last meeting we talked with the students on SCORE, I believe it's what's their organization is called. And I was wondering if the policy committee had any updates on the flag raising thing.
Sorry. I spoke with Peter and Vicky about this today, and they are going to look at it as administrators and do the research for us and help us draft some type of a policy.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Lindsay?
Okay, so we're in other. There were a couple things I wanted to ask about that weren't on the agenda, and I don't know if it would be, something simple or to add to the next agenda, but just if we had any updates about the teacher pension issue. That was one thing. The next thing was getting an update on the 6th grade move. And I would be really interested in hearing sort of a report from the teachers and, an introduction to the principal, if that's something that is coming up. And then the third thing was there was something about the agenda format that didn't fall under the consent agenda or the reflection at the end that I wanted to add.
Great.
So so would these things be something to have a quick discussion on now or table?
Just shoot me an email, Lindsay, with those so that we'll add it to the bunch.
Okay. And then as far as the agenda format, what I specifically wanted to ask about was the question, I don't know if maybe this would be a retreat thing, but allocating times. I've worked with some boards where certain parts, it was just kind of a ballpark looking at the agenda. Is it possible to have a rough idea of how much time will be allocated for different agenda items? And the next item was, might we have a time at the end of a meeting to talk about, setting the next agenda, having a little bit more of a dialogue with the board. And then finally, having something on the agenda that's a regularly occurring committee report that would highlight some of the minutes during the board meeting.
Great. And if you can just include those in that email, that would be awesome.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Great. Peter Conlon, we did not get to negotiations in our last executive session, so we put it on here tonight in case that is necessary. Is that necessary?
I think not. I'll tell sort of update the board, what we can certainly talk about in open session. So for our new board members, we have been sort of going on a year-to-year basis with negotiations as things were sort of unclear as to what was happening at the state level. So we are quite late in the game in a normal period getting into this during COVID. Perhaps it's to our advantage just because a lot of other districts have settled. But anyway, we are about to start for committee members on May 4th, that Tuesday, probably starting at 4 for our first meeting. We meet first as a committee, and then we meet with first the teachers union, and then with the staff union, or whatever order we come up with. So we're going to get that started. We're kind of hoping that this will be relatively quick. I think that there's just desire on all sides to do this, make it happen, and move on. And we're hopefully going to have a multi-year contract, so we aren't back doing this each year. So that's basically where things stand. We have not negotiated yet, and our first meeting will be May 4th.
Great. Thank you for the update.
And after that, at our next ACSD meeting, we will have a executive session just to sort of bring everybody up to date as to where the two sides are, and get sort of the board's guidance for the committee to move forward.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, that is everything, and it's 8:48. Oh, Betty?
Yes, sorry. I would like to also add, at the beginning of this month, I think Peter B shared with us that that Nicole Carter had been selected as ACSD's Director of Equity and Student Services. I would at some point maybe like to hear more about her work. You know, with the whole IB certification, and how her role fits in to the whole picture, and what her duties are. Yeah, I'd just like to know more about that role at some point. Doesn't have to be today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm sure, Peter, we could have an opportunity to have that role presented, and Nicole as well. It would be great to, as that position becomes more formalized, for us to get some insight there. All right, so with that, a motion to adjourn. Suzanne and Mary G. Thank you all, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and see you in a couple weeks.
Night. Bye.
Good night.